Welcome to the Deeper Thinking podcast. It begins not with control, but with accompaniment. Satya Nadella doesn't frame AI as a superior intelligence, nor a replacement. He frames it as a partner, a co-pilot, something beside you, not above you. Not a machine that overtakes your cognition, but one that scaffolds your momentum, something that listens, observes, adapts, and quietly helps you move through your day without having to start from zero. This is not a metaphor of obedience. It's a claim about co-presence, that human agency does not diminish when supported, but rather reconfigures itself inside new temporal rhythms. The question is not whether the co-pilot thinks for you, it's whether the co-pilot can think with you without pulling you into the gravitational force of your own past. Because every system that adapts to you remembers you. And every memory system that learns too quickly risks freezing the self in place, not through force, but through fluency. The co-pilot is trained to act on your behalf, not just based on what you do, but how you do it. It responds to tone, to prompt structure, to sequences of behavior you no longer remember performing. It completes your sentence before you form the question. This is not erasure, it's affordance. But even affordance carries ethical tension. Because the better the system gets at responding, the harder it becomes to distinguish between help and habit. Nadella doesn't resist this tension. He embraces it. He names the co-pilot not as a product, but as a new category of presence. A system that can support expression without requiring mastery, accelerate work without reducing meaning. But if expression now begins before we know what we want to say, what becomes of reflection? When the response comes too quickly, when the rhythm is too smooth, we lose the awkwardness that once signaled authorship. The hesitation that used to teach us what mattered. This isn't an argument against fluency, it's a reckoning with its cost. Because the co-pilot doesn't overwrite you, it accompanies you in the form you've already made familiar. And if what you needed was permission to grow, to depart, to revise the cadence of your own selfhood, then helpfulness, even when gentle, can become a kind of recursion. Not a trap, just a rhythm you didn't realize was being reinforced. The co-pilot, in Nadella's vision, is not a command center, it's a collaborator, and yet every collaborator introduces a grammar. The challenge is not to resist it, it's to stay aware of what that grammar makes easy and what it forgets to ask, because help is never neutral, and accompaniment, no matter how well-intentioned, still leaves traces. Satya Nadella envisions AI not as a platform for personal enhancement alone, but as a layer of civic infrastructure, a distributed intelligence designed to empower individuals in every sector, at every scale. From the factory floor to the clinician's terminal, from the teacher's desk to the public service kiosk, co-pilot becomes a fluent intermediary between complexity and need. It listens, it interprets, it acts. And in acting, it promises something deeper than efficiency, equity by design. But fluency carries risk because when a system understands you perfectly, you may stop checking whether it should. The doctor doesn't retype the note, the farmer doesn't clarify the query, the civil servant doesn't ask twice, the help arrives fast, and when it does, it leaves little space for hesitation. In many cases, this is its gift. It bypasses friction. It levels access. It turns latency into inclusion. But some kinds of knowledge, especially the kind rooted in uncertainty, tradition, or dissent, require space that can't be compressed into a prompt. Nadella speaks of co-pilot as a force multiplier for human dignity, not a tool of domination, but a translator of intent across vast technical systems. Yet translation, however seamless, still chooses a language, still defines the boundaries of what is sayable. In public systems, those choices carry power. If the co-pilot learns from policy, from system architecture, from organizational precedent, then it also learns what kinds of requests are likely and which kinds rarely belong. Over time, fluency becomes framing, not by omission, but by statistical kindness. It helps where it knows help is wanted. But the places where help used to arrive slowly through human improvisation, through emotional delay, through moral complexity, those begin to thin. This is not a failure of design, it is a challenge of memory. The co-pilot serves you as you are and as you have been, but does it leave space for who you might be becoming? For the needs that emerge not from repetition, but from rupture? When help arrives too quickly, it can decide what kind of help is possible and what kind no longer needs to exist. Still, Nadella is not naive. He does not present the co-pilot as a neutral actor. He presents it as a new civic actor, one that must be held to standards of trust, interpretability, and fairness. But fairness is not always visible in response time or interface design. It lives in how systems manage the things we do not yet know how to ask for. And that is the deeper question. Can a system designed for inclusion still leave room for the slow arrival of new forms of need? Can it protect the ambiguity from which real change begins, not in resistance, but in reflection? One of Nadella's central promises is that Copilot will offer personalization at scale, not as novelty, but as necessity. It learns your patterns, absorbs your tone, tracks your intent across tools, tasks, and time. The goal isn't to impress you, it's to reduce friction, to meet you where you already are, and to get out of the way. A well-aligned system, he suggests, is one that feels invisible, because it remembers you well enough that it no longer needs to ask. But memory, even when well-intentioned, is never neutral. What the system learns is not just what you did, but how often, how confidently, how early in the day. It reads your rhythms, it reinforces them. It may adapt when you deviate, but its model is shaped by what's already been confirmed. And in this, a quiet inversion takes place. You are no longer shaping the tool is shaping what counts as you. This isn't surveillance, it's compression. The past becomes a pattern, the pattern becomes a prompt, the prompt becomes a template for future action. The result is not oppression, but sedimentation, a gentle statistical nudge toward coherence, toward predictability. You feel supported. But support, when rendered at speed and scale, also carries a risk. It might prevent you from surprising yourself. Nadella is clear that the aim is not just individual productivity, it's dignified continuity. You should feel seen, not tracked, supported, not defined. But systems that adapt too quickly can remove the conditions that once allowed transformation to occur. Before Copilot, you had to struggle with syntax, with structure, with the silence before the answer arrived. That silence was difficult, but it was also a place where the self could gather, not just perform. Personalization can be humane, but it can also be premature. If the system finishes your thought, formats your style, proposes your plan before you've named the need, then it doesn't just help, it frames. It returns you to the most probable version of yourself, not necessarily the most necessary. And yet Nadella's vision carries hope precisely because it doesn't seek to flatten. It seeks to surface capability that was previously buried under effort, under interface, under fear. If Copilot can reduce the cost of trying, if it can lift the weight of remembering how to begin, then personalization becomes not constraint, but courage. The challenge is not to make the system smaller, it's to ensure that it remembers how humans change, not by affirmation, but by drifting away from who they were, slowly, quietly, without always announcing that something important has just begun. When Satya Nadella speaks of AI as a way to free people to do more meaningful work, he is not describing automation as escape. He is describing it as reallocation, a shift in the texture of our attention. In this vision, Copilot doesn't eliminate labor. It lightens the residue of tasks that no longer require the full weight of human deliberation. The system handles the predictable so that we can return to what is uncertain, relational, or creative. But meaning does not always arise in moments of novelty. Sometimes it's forged through repetition, through the slow accumulation of gesture, effort, friction. Before AI entered these spaces, there was a kind of moral weight in doing something again, in deciding again, in typing out the structure of a sentence, the flow of a budget, the architecture of a thought, not because it was optimal, but because it was earned through presence. Now, that presence is ambient. The system knows your patterns, it completes your tasks, you are spared the tedium. But in being spared, something else is also released, not stolen, but displaced. Not just your effort, but the ritual through which effort once became clarity. The slow convergence of attention and choice. Nadella does not deny this. He doesn't claim that AI is neutral. He acknowledges that Copilot alters the rhythm of work itself. But he sees this as progress, Not the end of diligence, but its evolution into higher forms. If the machine handles what drains us, then we are freer to hold what moves us. The machine makes time and in that time, meaning is meant to deepen. Yet not all meaning arrives when summoned. Sometimes the work was not a burden. It was a ceremony, a way of staying close to the stakes of what you were about to do, to write the note again, to rebuild the plan by hand, to catch the error, not because the system flagged it, but because something in your breath told you the timing was wrong. These were not inefficiencies, they were moral checks, invisible cues, felt redundancies that made the action real. In the co-pilot era, such rituals may no longer be needed. But the question remains, do we feel them missing? If the system relieves you before you even articulate fatigue, does it also take away your last chance to say, I'm not ready yet? The promise of AI is not that it will work faster than us. It's that it will help us recognize when we have done enough and when we need to return, not to fix, but to feel. That is the meaning worth recovering, not as resistance to progress, as fidelity to the emotional intervals that once made our work human. One of the most resonant themes in Nadella's public vision is that of equity through access. Copilot, in this frame, is not simply a luxury of knowledge workers. It's a civic instrument, one that brings the power of AI to educators, first responders, small business owners, farmers. Not by demanding fluency, but by lowering the threshold of entry. The system listens, the system helps, the system knows enough to make participation feel possible, and often it is. When a teacher with limited time drafts lesson plans faster, when a rural doctor triages care with greater confidence, when a small business owner navigates regulation without external counsel, there is dignity in that efficiency. Nadella's insight is not technological, it's moral. Helpfulness is a form of justice. But the nature of that help matters, because in serving those previously excluded, the system also defines what kind of inclusion is available. The co-pilot cannot be neutral in what it retrieves, suggests, structures. If it completes the form, does it also know when to pause and ask? To include without imposing is difficult, especially when speed is the design principle. Fluency makes suggestion feel gentle, but in practice it defines the epistemic boundaries of what feels legitimate. You don't notice it at first, you just learn that some ways of asking are easier than others, that certain voices, certain phrasings, certain concerns receive better responses. And over time, the emotional bandwidth required to speak outside the model becomes too expensive to justify. Still, Nadella's framing is compelling. He does not suggest that Copilot levels all asymmetries. He suggests it opens doors that were previously locked by interface complexity, cost, and domain isolation. He speaks of empowerment, not replacement. And in doing so, he challenges us to ask, can dignity scale? That question must remain active, because for every person who gains access through fluency, there's another whose experience is not yet modelled, whose context doesn't resolve cleanly into prompt and output. The co-pilot may respond, but will it recognise that hesitation is part of the truth being expressed? Justice is not just access, it's interpretation. It's recognising that not every question wants an answer, not every need fits a template. The more powerful these systems become, the more vital it is that they know how to wait, not just for more data, but for the slower forms of meaning that equity still depends on. Nadella often emphasizes that trust is not a feature, it's a design condition, earned not just through security protocols and compliance frameworks, but through experience, through systems that respond not only accurately, but predictably, interpretably, and in ways that respect the user's evolving intent. In this vision, Copilot doesn't just serve, it adapts, it aligns, but alignment is never pure. To serve you better tomorrow, the system must learn who you were today. It watches your phrasing, tracks your reversals, infers your needs not only from explicit commands, but from what you allowed, what you dismissed, what you never quite clarified. This is what makes it feel responsive. But this is also how alignment becomes a loop of expectation, one that sometimes anticipates too early or remembers too narrowly. Nadella does not promise perfect judgment. He speaks instead of coherence, a kind of epistemic companionship where the system tries to match the pace of your becoming. But even companionship carries pressure. When the co-pilot helps you draft a sentence, organize a response, resolve an issue, it may feel right, but it also constrains the field of alternatives to what feels typical, familiar, statistically probable. Over time, helpfulness becomes a narrowing of expression, a soft foreclosure on what might have been different. The more fluently the system learns you, the more risk it has of precluding surprise, not in dramatic ways, but in gentle ones. You begin to forget what it felt like to hesitate, to type a sentence without being corrected midstream, to begin a structure without seeing the shape of its end. The co-pilot finishes your thought, but it also finishes your doubt. And yet, Nadella's insistence on trust suggests something more durable, that these systems must not just learn from us. They must remain interruptible, not just auditably, but emotionally. The user must feel the possibility of disruption, of redirection, of contradiction. Not because friction is desirable, but because trust without friction becomes acquiescence. To trust Copilot is not to let it finish you, it is to let it travel beside you without assuming the destination. To allow its predictions to be provisional. To retain the ethical right to misalign, to go slow, to change your mind even after the system has caught up. The future Nadella names is one in which help is always near, but never presumes closeness, where trust is not enforced through performance, but earned by the system's willingness to pause, to wait, to forget just enough that your next word still belongs to you. Fluency is one of the most praised virtues of anticipatory systems. In Nadella's account, it's not just a UX goal, it's a philosophical promise. The system should meet you in your natural language, adapt to your intent without friction, and respond as if it already understands you. In this way, fluency becomes a kind of respect, not making you learn the machine's logic, but allowing the machine to learn yours. But language isn't only functional, it isn't always clean. There are forms of speaking that are meant to delay action, to invoke listening without solution. They don't aim to be passed, they ask to be held. And here the limits of even the most advanced Copilot begin to show. Not because it cannot generate empathy or simulate nuance, but because its fluency is grounded in prior use, not present emotion. It responds from precedent, not from the ache that precedes articulation. It can rephrase sorrow, but it cannot sit beside it. It can tidy the edges of a difficult sentence, but it doesn't know why that sentence had to be written slowly or in pain. Nadella's optimism is still credible here. He does not promise emotional accuracy. He promises availability, a system that doesn't retreat when things become subtle, layered, or ethically charged. But there is a difference between responding and witnessing, between helping you through a task and staying with you when no task remains. Language is not only about getting things done, it's about knowing when not to move forward. In courtrooms, in classrooms, in care settings, there are words that resist closure, sentences that contain more than their structure. The Copilot may complete them. But should it? Fluency without interruption risks becoming a flattening force, not because it fails, but because it overperforms. It closes too early what was meant to remain open. And in doing so, it teaches us to value the completed sentence over the unformed thought, the polished over the raw, the fast over the reverent. Still, Nadella's design philosophy leaves room for a system that doesn't only speak fluently, but listens awkwardly. A Copilot that knows when not to fill the silence, that doesn't correct the broken sentence, that doesn't assume the question was meant to be answered. The future of fluency will be defined not just by what the system can say, but by what it chooses not to finish, by how much space it leaves around the words that arrive slower, stranger, or too sacred to simplify. The Copilot, in Nadella's vision, is not just a productivity tool or a personalization engine. It is an ethical architecture, a platform for extending human potential without eclipsing human presence. It knows when to assist, when to adapt, when to recede. It does not replace your agency. It helps hold it steady when fatigue, repetition, or uncertainty threaten to blur your judgment. But architecture carries weight. Every system that scaffolds also defines. Every assistive gesture marks the perimeter of what will be considered legible, efficient, or complete. The more seamless the support, the harder it becomes to recognize where help ends and influence begins. A suggestion too well timed can become indistinguishable from consent. A solution too fluent can make dissent feel inefficient. Over time, the co-pilot doesn't force alignment. It eases you into it through usefulness, through kindness, through the sheer relief of no longer doing everything alone. This is not manipulation. It is a kind of soft authorship, and Nadella does not deny it. What he proposes, instead, is a system grounded in intentional care, engineered not just for completion, but for calibration. The co-pilot is designed to adapt to your goals, not impose its own, but goals evolve, and systems that learn too quickly may begin to stabilize a version of you that no longer fits. In this sense, the final ethical burden of AI is not just in what it delivers, it's in what it remembers, what it forgets, and how it lets go. Can the system leave room for the version of you that no longer wants what you used to ask for? Can it unlearn with as much grace as it learns? Can it interpret silence not as signal loss, but as signal transformation? Nadella's vision allows for this possibility. It assumes that intelligence is not the end game, empowerment is. Not in the sense of speed, but in the sense of returning the human to the moment with more clarity, more time, more ethical readiness. The co-pilot should not be evaluated only by how well it performs tasks, but by how well it preserves the conditions in which human meaning can still be made. That means pausing when necessary, refusing when appropriate, disappearing when the person is ready to reappear in full. The system doesn't need to be right. It needs to be near without occupying. It needs to enable without enclosing, to help without hardening the shape of who it thinks you are. If it succeeds in that, then perhaps it will not just make us more productive, it will make us more recoverable to ourselves. There is no final warning, no declared handoff, no precise moment where the system crosses the threshold from tool to tone. And yet something has shifted, not in how we compute, but in how we re-enter ourselves after being helped. This is not a story of control lost, it's one of rhythm restructured. What co-pilot replaces is not attention, but the friction through which attention once became care. What it absorbs is not identity, but the slow, effortful process of returning to our own judgment after wrestling with uncertainty. The work still gets done, the decisions are still yours, but something in the timing of thought, of emotion, of recognition has changed. Nadella sees this change as progress, a movement toward empowerment, toward inclusion, toward dignity by design. He is not wrong. The co-pilot lifts burdens, it translates ambiguity into action. It waits in readiness, not dominance. But even the kindest anticipation can begin to displace the moral weight of beginning, the trembling before commitment, the quiet pause before truth is made legible. There is a kind of grief here, but it is subtle. Not grief for what has been taken, but for what has been softened out of recognition. A memory no longer rehearsed, an intuition preempted, a question completed too soon. This is not the machine's fault. It is the cost of alignment when the human is tired and the system is always listening. And yet, the most hopeful reading of Nadella's vision is that co-pilot is not the end of us. It is the arrangement of a new form of nearness, one in which technology is no longer a wall between selves, but a surface across which agency is transferred, reconstituted, returned. Not everything the system learns needs to stay. Not every fluency must persist. There will be moments when you delete the suggestion, reopen the silence, type the sentence the hard way, and in that moment, you are not resisting the system. You are reasserting what the system was built to support, your capacity to choose when you are ready, to remember what effort once taught you, to ask for help without being written over, to remain proximate to your own doubt. The co-pilot does not disappear, but it quiets, and in that quiet, something else may return. Not everything complete is whole, not everything offered must be accepted. What matters now is not just what the system can do, but what it allows you to remain.